Something historic is happening. For the first time in modern history, the balance of power between Africa and the West is not shifting quietly. It is erupting in plain sight. Nations that were once treated as silent suppliers are now standing tall, cutting off the flow of cheap resources that fueled Western prosperity for centuries. 10 countries, 10 bold moves, 10 shockwaves shaking global markets. This is not charity. This is not negotiation. This is Africa taking back control. For decades, the West believed the arrangement was permanent. Oil shipped out by the barrel, gold by the ton, uranium by the pound, lithium by the truckload. From Silicon Valley to Wall Street, from Paris to London, Western comfort, technology, and wealth were built on African soil. But Africa itself was left vulnerable, dependent, and trapped in cycles of poverty. That illusion has collapsed. From Ghana's gold to Niger's uranium, from Uganda's coffee to Namibia's lithium, Africa is slamming the door on the old order. Raw exports are being banned, local industries are rising, profits are staying home, and the world is being forced to play by Africa's rules. This is not only about economics, it is about survival, sovereignty, and dignity. The question is no longer if Africa can push back. The question is, how far will it go? And can the West endure the consequences of a system it thought would never break? Brace yourself because the shockwaves are just beginning. Look at Ghana. For decades, one of Africa's top gold producers watched its wealth sail away, refined abroad, converted into foreign profit while its own economy remained vulnerable. The cycle was brutal. Raw gold leaving cheap foreign currencies flooding in, and then financial shocks hitting hard every time global markets trembled. Ghana was treated like a pit stop, not a power. That script has ended. Today, Accra has made a decisive move. Mining companies are now required to sell 20% of their refined gold directly to the central bank. Not raw, refined. The goal is clear. Strengthen reserves, protect the CD, and cut dependence on the dollar and the euro. The message? Ghana will not beg for stability from foreign banks. It will build it at home. Now shift to Uganda. In 2021, this nation stunned the global market by banning the export of raw agricultural products, including its world-famous coffee. For too long, Ugandan farmers harvested beans, while foreign corporations roasted, packaged, branded, and pocketed the real wealth. The imbalance was so severe that coffee giants in Europe made billions, while Ugandan growers lived on scraps. That reality flipped overnight. Today, Uganda exports coffee ready for the shelves, roasted, packaged, value-added. Jobs are multiplying, industries are rising, and foreign buyers have no choice but to pay more. Uganda's policy is more than economics. It is justice. It is dignity restored. Gabon and Mozambique told a similar story with timber. For generations, their forests were cut down, shipped raw, and transformed into luxury furniture and flooring in European capitals. The profits stacked up abroad, while the nations of origin were left with bare land and bare pockets. That injustice ended with one stroke of policy. No more raw log exports. If you want timber, you buy it processed in Libreville or Maputo. The effect was electric. Carpentry, furniture making, and large-scale wood industries grew overnight. Jobs flourished, local wealth expanded, and for the first time, the forests of Africa were not just plundered. They were protected and transformed into power. And then came Niger. For decades, France's energy grid, nearly 70% nuclear, depended on uranium mined in Niger. But while France thrived, Niger languished at the bottom of poverty charts. Uranium sold for pennies, dignity sold for nothing. That era is finished. New restrictions on uranium exports have flipped the power table. Paris now faces soaring costs and a fragile energy supply, while Niamey holds the cards. With one policy, Niger proved what Western leaders never wanted to admit, that their so-called energy independence was always built on African dependence. Each of these moves is not isolated. Together they form a chorus of nations declaring that they will no longer be silent suppliers. They will be strategists, decision makers, architects of their own destiny. And the world, it is trembling, because the balance of power is no longer tilted in one direction. It is shifting, fast. Now look to Guinea, a nation where rising food prices cut deep into everyday life, while fields of rice, maize, and yams were shipped abroad to fill foreign markets. The contradiction was unbearable. How could Guineans struggle to feed their families while their harvests sailed to wealthier nations? Leaders in Conakry answered with action. They banned the export of staple crops, not for profit, but for people. Food sovereignty became the law. In a world rattled by global supply shocks, Guinea made one thing clear: its citizens come first. Importers who once relied on cheap African staples are scrambling, costs are rising, and the message is undeniable. Crops are no longer commodities alone. They are lifelines, and those lifelines will stay home. Shift to Namibia. Lithium, the heartbeat of the electric vehicle revolution. For years, raw lithium left the ground cheap, powering the dreams of automakers abroad. But Namibia refused to be a spectator in the clean energy race. The government froze raw lithium exports, telling the world, if you want our minerals, you build with us, on our terms. That means processing plants in Windhoek, jobs for Namibians, industries rooted in Africa. Tech giants and automakers, counting on cheap supply, now face two choices: invest locally or be left behind. The pause shook markets, but it also signaled something greater. Africa will not just fuel the green future, it will shape it. Travel. West to Ivory Coast, the land of cocoa, the backbone of the global chocolate industry. For decades, billions in profits flowed to Western companies, while the farmers who grew the beans remained in poverty. That story is ending. Abidjan is restricting raw cocoa exports, determined to build a chocolate industry of its own. The vision is simple: move from supplier to producer, from silence to voice. Western chocolate giants now face a choice: pay more, invest locally, or lose access to the supply they have long taken for granted. Ivory Coast is no longer content to sweeten the profits of others. It will claim its own share. Then comes the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a land holding staggering reserves of copper and cobalt, the very lifeblood of smartphones, solar grids, and electric vehicles. For years, these minerals were shipped raw, turned into billion-dollar products abroad. That model is over. The DRC has placed strict limits on raw exports, demanding that processing take place on Congolese soil. The meaning is clear: if the world wants to build its green future, it will do it with Congo, not on Congo's back. No more crumbs. No more exploitation. Ownership is shifting to where the wealth begins. Finally, Zimbabwe. For decades, it exported raw chrome, critical for stainless steel and advanced alloys, at bargain prices. Foreign industries thrived, while Harare was left with scraps. That chapter has closed. Raw chrome exports are banned. Smelting and processing are now local. Jobs are rising, industries are growing, and Western companies face higher costs and tighter supply. Zimbabwe is no longer a stop on someone else's supply chain. It is a force reshaping the chain itself. Together, these moves form a wave of sovereignty, a wave of dignity, a wave that is shaking the foundations of the global economy. Step back and look at the bigger picture. These are not isolated moves. They are converging into a continental pattern, a synchronized beat that is echoing far beyond Africa's borders. One by one, governments are tightening control, industries are rising, and global markets are trembling under the weight of a new reality. The age of cheap African resources is over, and the world is scrambling to adjust. Western corporations that once depended on low-cost access are now staring at higher prices, shrinking supply, and disrupted supply chains. Coffee giants in Europe, once fattened by raw beans from Uganda, are forced to pay more for roasted and packaged exports. French energy companies, accustomed to bargain uranium from Niger, are struggling with rising costs and fragile power grids. Automakers in Detroit and Stuttgart, who bet their future on cheap lithium and cobalt, are suddenly calculating the real price of dependence. The ripple effects stretch across the globe. Inflation spikes as food and mineral prices climb. Investors grow nervous as supply chains fracture. And behind every boardroom meeting in New York, every emergency session in Brussels, every strategy paper in Paris, a single question lingers. What if Africa keeps pushing further? Because this is not just about economics, it is about power. For generations, Africa's wealth was treated as an open tap, flowing outward without resistance. Profits piled up in London banks and Parisian stock markets, while African nations were told to wait, to accept crumbs, to remain dependent. That model is collapsing. The new reality is sovereignty. Each policy, whether it is Ghana securing its gold, Ivory Coast protecting its cocoa, or the DRC holding its cobalt, signals the same principle. Africa will no longer be the silent warehouse of the world. It will be the workshop, the marketplace, and the decision maker. And Western capitals are feeling the pressure. The lights flickered in Paris when Niger squeezed uranium exports. Panic spread in European markets when cocoa prices surged on Ivory Coast's new rules. Tech CEOs in Silicon Valley are suddenly discussing African policy not as charity, but as survival. The shift is unmistakable. Africa is not asking permission. Africa is setting terms. This is escalation, not in words, but in deeds. And the West is realizing too late that its stability was built on a fragile illusion, that Africa would never push back. That assumption has shattered. The global balance is shifting fast, and the tremors are only the beginning. At its core, this wave of policies is not only about trade, minerals, or exports. It is about something deeper. It is about sovereignty. It is about dignity. It is about rewriting the meaning of independence in the 21st century. For decades, Africa's flags waved, its anthems played, its borders were recognized, but true independence was always incomplete. Because as long as a nation's gold could leave for pennies, as long as its farmers worked for scraps while foreign companies reaped billions, as long as its uranium lit foreign cities while its own streets stayed dark, independence was only paper deep. What Ghana, Uganda, Niger, Namibia, Ivory Coast, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Zimbabwe are doing now is something revolutionary. They are transforming independence into substance, into action, into lived reality. They are telling the world that their people come first, that their resources are not giveaways, that their wealth is not open for the taking. These moves carry a symbolism larger than numbers on a chart. When Guinea keeps its rice at home, it is saying, no Guinean child will go hungry to fill foreign markets. When Namibia freezes lithium exports, it is declaring, the clean future will not be built on dirty exploitation. When Ivory Coast keeps more cocoa inside its borders, it is telling the chocolate industry, respect must finally match supply. This is more than economics. It is justice long delayed. It is fairness reclaimed. And it is pride restored. For the people of Africa, it is a reminder that their nations are not victims of history, but authors of the future. That their forests, their minerals, their crops, their labor, all of it carries value, not just abroad, but at home. For the world, it is a message impossible to ignore. Convenience will no longer outweigh sovereignty. Cheap access will no longer outweigh dignity. Exploitation will no longer outweigh justice. And for the West, it is a reckoning. The illusion of infinite cheap resources has cracked. The truth is exposed. The foundations of modern comfort, from smartphones to energy grids, have always rested on Africa's shoulders. Now those shoulders are standing tall. This is the moral shift. Independence is not measured by flags or speeches. It is measured by whether a nation can feed its own, power its own, and set its own terms. Africa is proving that it can. The symbolism is clear. The warehouse has become the workshop. The silent supplier has become the strategist. The continent once dismissed as dependent is rising as decisive. And the moral is simple, powerful, unforgettable. Africa is not for sale. Africa is for Africans. And the world must learn to respect that truth. This is no longer a story of quiet policy changes. It is a story of confrontation, of Africa standing eye to eye with the very powers that once dictated its fate. And for the first time in modern memory, it is not Africa blinking. Look at France, a nation whose pride and identity rest on its nuclear grid. Nearly 70% of its energy built on uranium. For decades, the lifeline of that power ran through Niger, sold at bargain prices, hidden from public view. Today, that lifeline is in jeopardy. Paris scrambles to secure new deals, but the truth is out. Its energy independence was always an illusion, tethered to African soil, and Niger has cut the cord. Look at Europe. Chocolate companies that built empires on Ivory Coast cocoa now face restrictions, higher costs, and the reality that the beans they took for granted will no longer come cheap. Their profits are cracking, their supply chains splintering, and their dominance melting like sugar in the sun. Look at America. Tech giants betting their futures on cobalt and lithium for electric vehicles and clean energy are being told. No more shortcuts. No more open pits for pennies. If Silicon Valley wants its green revolution, it must build it with Africa, not on Africa. The continent is no longer a resource pit stop. It is the architect of the very future these companies claim to champion. And look at Africa itself. Nations once divided by borders and colonial scars are now united by a common principle: control. Ghana with gold, Uganda with coffee, Guinea with food, Namibia with lithium, the Democratic Republic of the Congo with cobalt, Zimbabwe with chrome, Gabon and Mozambique with timber. One by one, their voices form a chorus, and that chorus is shaking the halls of power. This is the breaking point. The illusion of Africa as passive supplier has shattered. The West is being forced to confront a new reality, that the Ivory continent it once dismissed as dependent is now dictating terms, that the very resources fueling the future of technology, energy, and food security flow from African soil and will no longer flow for free. The symbolism is undeniable. The lights in Europe flicker because Niger tightened its grip. Prices spike in New York because Ivory Coast kept its cocoa. Boardrooms tremble in Silicon Valley because the DRC demanded respect. Each shockwave is a reminder. Africa holds the cards, and the moral is cinematic in its clarity. The warehouse has become the fortress. The supplier has become the strategist. The exploited has become the empowered. History is turning, not slowly, but all at once. And the world must face the fact that Africa is no longer in the shadows of global power. It is at the center of it. Look closely at what has unfolded. This is not a coincidence. This is a continental declaration. 10 nations have drawn the line. No more gold giveaways. No more uranium for pennies. No more coffee stolen at the farm gate. No more cocoa leaving without value. No more lithium shipped raw for someone else's green future. Africa has said one word, loud and clear: enough. This is more than economics. This is the rebirth of pride, the rebirth of dignity, the rebirth of true independence. Flags and borders were never enough. Real freedom means control over your wealth, your food, your future, and that freedom is finally being claimed. The West is rattled. Its industries are scrambling. Its markets are shaking. Because the truth is exposed. The foundation of modern prosperity was always African, and now Africa has pulled the plug. So I leave you with this question: will the West adapt to Africa's new rules, or will it collapse under the weight of its own illusions? Tell me what you think in the comments. I want your voice in this conversation. And if you believe in Africa's rise, smash that like button, share this video with everyone you know, and subscribe for more stories the world doesn't want you to hear. Because this is not the end of the story. This is the beginning of Africa's century, and the world is watching.